have been porn.
You said have been porn?
Did I say porn? I did say porn. Oh, good Lord.
And by the way, and we are live! Welcome to Live Action Roleplay with Ryan Omega, with my special guest. If you can introduce yourself, please.
Good morning, everybody. As you can tell, I have not been awake yet. This is why we're having mango mimosas. I am Tina Braganza.
Yes, so we're going to continue with launching some of these podcasts from Kublacon, and we're having blueberry waffles and mango mimosas.
Yay, this should wake me up, I hope.
Yeah, it is 9 in the morning right now because we have a full day of things. So, Tina, do you have any shout-outs?
To, the fantastic LARPers from last night and today, and basically all the LARPers that we've seen all this weekend and continuing this weekend, and pretty much all the gamers and all the fantastic costumes and just, great role players. But, that's what LARPing is all about, right? Really great role players.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that in Kublacon, I am seeing more people in costume now. And I know that this con runs at the same time as FanimeCon, which is known to be the cosplay con, but Kublacon is having its fair share of people who are getting dressed up.
Absolutely, but I think that's a big part of LARPing. There's not very many people I know who like to do LARPing that don't like to get very involved in all aspects of it. Besides the performance, there's costuming, but yeah. Mm-hmm. So if you're gonna do a LARP, if you're gonna do performances, and you're gonna do, which that's part of performing and part of improv and all that. There's costuming and so on and so forth. So can't say I was terribly surprised to see the big costumes and all the good performances. So yeah,
it's early in the morning. Mm-hmm. That's why my voice also doesn't sound like it normally does. It's the just got up Ryan voice. My shout out is to Kublacon itself for, first of all, being generous enough to provide me a pass to come to this weekend. But also, I recorded an impromptu podcast in one of the rooms that wasn't being used. And instead of shooing me out when they knew that they had to be set up for an hour, someone, his name was Jono, came in and sat down and listened to us record the podcast and made sure that we were taken care of. Absolutely. While we were recording the podcast. It was really, really wonderful and cool to see Kublacon support the podcast in the way of just making sure that we had a quiet space in a place that would have been normally occupied. And I know that if I had gone to any other con, we probably would have been shooed out just because there are so many gamers that need gaming spaces. They were also helpful in getting a group of us who were there from Dystopia Rising NorCal, which is Kai's game. We ended up being there as a group, and they were trying to find a space for all 9 of us to play, and they were so helpful in seating us in one of the rooms that was not being used and allowing us to be grouped together to play. So again, shout out to the terrific staff and team of Kublacon for making this a wonderful experience so far, and I'm looking forward to playing more this morning. All right, so we did our shout outs, and so the topic for today, knowing my sister and her theater background, I thought this was going to be the most appropriate topic, and the topic is improv versus LARP.
Yeah, that's definitely a topic that, maybe a little bit about.
A little bit. So what is your background in all of this?
Well, God, how long have I been doing LARP? It's been years. We're not gonna, ladies do not that I'm much of a lady that way, but how long I've been doing LARP? Well, we'll say it's been a pretty long time that I've been doing LARP.
Can we say as long as me?
Yes.
You've been doing this as long as I have. So.
Yes. Yes. It's been a very long time. We'll say that there have been there are children that are much that are no longer considered children anymore, that are still younger than how long I've been doing LARP. So we'll put it that way.
I'm glad how you phrase that, because that means it's vague enough to be 3 years or 10.
Yes, let's put it that way. So yeah, that's a good way to put it. So yeah, I've been doing LARP for, in multiple areas, and I do mean geographically. And in places and so on and so forth. And I can't say that my theater background hasn't been kind of similar in that sense. I've done theater and also film and other medias as well. So just acting in general, acting and performing as far as theatrical and so on and so forth, for almost most of my life, I would even say, since I was very little. Since I was tiny and so on and so forth. So it's interesting how where the two intersect and how easily they do. And it's interesting because it's strange how whenever I say, I've done LARP for a very long time. And whenever I mention the word LARP, for people who do know what it is, they'll have the reaction of, wow, you're really a gamer. Or they'll say, oh, you're one of those. And they'll say something like, either way, you still have they have this concept of it's still very much a part of the gaming world, whether way their bias goes. So it's an interesting thing to me to think of when I think of LARP. I do think of it as gaming, but there are a lot of people who do LARP that really don't have much of a gaming background. And however you define gaming, whether it's video gaming or it's, traditional RPGs, like tabletop, whatever the case may be, there's a lot of us who have actually done so who didn't come to it from that standpoint. So, I think it's... Yeah, I think it's interesting, as you were mentioning before, that there's people who come from it from an improv performing standpoint. Yeah, from an improv performing standpoint, for sure.
What would you say is the biggest difference between calling an activity improv and calling an activity LARP, based on your experience?
Well, I guess one's experience with gaming, specifically, one's experience with mechanics of what specific game you're playing at the time. You get to play within the world that you're in, but then you also have a defined set of rules or constructs, and that's pretty much what it comes down to. For me, particularly, like when I was doing Blank Slate, it's interesting when I had a certain amount of time to be able to know what I was heading into to an extent. But I mean, I didn't know all of the entire background of it, but I had to rely on my improv background to be able to fill the role, and so I was able to use that. So it's just a different set of construct.
Yeah, and so by the way, Tina was on my show Blank Slate as the Countess of Carnelia. So in the context of Blank Slate, Carnelia was the only section of the empire to declare independence and hold it. And part of it was because they were a bunch of aristocrats that didn't want to be governed by an empire anymore. They were like, okay, we have too much money and power. We don't want to be governed by you. Go away. And so she represented a region that within the structure of the show, there were other regions that were also looking for independence. And it was an interesting challenge to create a one-shot character, a person who would only appear in a single episode, and try to make her significant. And at least it got to the point where the audience began to tattle on you dealing with canon, so that it did actually at least matter to the audience, so that it sounded like the audience was siding with the Empire, but it was good that there was someone to play that one-shot role. Were there any particular experiences that helped you formulate your character, even though, again, I gave you that character, I would say maybe even 4 days ago? So there was really not a lot to prep, and you also were doing things at the time.
Indeed.
Yeah, like, what did you do to prep when you had very little time to go on just even before the show?
And that's tying into the improv world. When you know a little bit about LARP, you do know that it's the same prep, almost the same prep as one does for both improv and also when you're performing. You get a little bit of the background from that part of performance, but you also get a little bit of the background of the gaming standpoint. So it's almost like two different parts that you have to put in. So that's generally what I did. I just looked into what the objectives were, both, as an actor and also as a performer, and, as far as what I would have to do in both instances. And so you just read through what I hesitate to use the word, but it's kind of the best word I can use at the moment. What the rules were, as it were. Well, rules and constructs, or really, again, you have your leeway to play with both. But then you look at the characterization of both from a practical standpoint and also from the character standpoint. And then you look at both, and then you say, okay, so how can I play within both? And that's generally what I do. And also with improv, it's the same thing. So that's what I did with her. I said, okay, so what in my background with LARP do I akin this to? And that's generally what I did. So I just got to look into it and be like, okay, so that's what I'm going to have to do. And I'm not to spoil anything else because, we don't want to go too far into that works. But that's and I think that's the best way you can go about using improv and using performance to do that when you don't have much time. When you literally have maybe with lots of other things to do, you take time to look at it and go, okay, well, this is what I have to do. So it was really highly enjoyable, especially to be around everybody else. So it's fun.
Yeah, like I'm very happy with my cast and crew. Like, they're just wonderful people to just hang with. For you, because this is also a show, and I realize that it's one thing to be in a LARP, but it's different to be on a LARP show where some of the conventions have to be different because it is being viewed. Were there any adjustments you felt like you needed to do when you knew that there were eyes on the internet watching you, as opposed to just role-playing with a group that didn't have a camera on you?
Probably the same that I feel whenever I have to be either on film or when I'm on actual stage. Stage or film in general. It's the same. They're the same. Not exactly the same as what I learn in school. I do have, obviously, the school background as far as both film, TV, and stage. But when you're in a traditional LARP, because you're not being filmed, you can play much more in the sense of you don't have to be as controlled with your movements and with your characterization and such. When you're in film and when you're being when you're being filmed at all, you have to be a little more controlled and have to be more specific as to your actions and how you're viewed, which does come with just background and with experience. And also it's interesting how that plays into, again, with gaming, which is a little bit different than actual, when you're doing LARP in person at cons and that type of thing, which is a little bit different, but it's all the same skill set. Well, not all the same, but similar skill set. It's just really what comes from at least taking a certain amount of time of characterization. And as long as you have that characterization in your soul or whatever you want to call it, within your body or within your body and within your mindset, then it's fine. If you just take a little bit amount of time to inherit that particular character in you, then it's just as easy. Granted, it's a little bit different than when you have an actual character where it's scripted or whatever the case may be, and that's very different. So when you have a scripted performer, and that's I wouldn't say it's easier, but that's very different, because that you already have a set amount of, I have to do this, I have to get that done. You have a set amount of stakes. But LARPing is different that way, because you don't. Mm-hmm. So which is actually, to me, it's actually a little bit harder to do that, because you have to, it definitely is harder, because you have to figure that out for yourself and have that there. But once you have that, then it's fine.
So when you mentioned that it's harder, so for this kind of a NPC, because I know NPCs are basically just anyone who is in a player character, what is your most ideal scenario? A storyteller giving you a full page of background, a storyteller giving you a paragraph of background, or giving you a couple of sentences of a background? Like, what works for you better?
If it was an actual NPC and a storyteller told me that I have a specific goal within a specific time frame, I personally would rather have I wouldn't say the longer the better, but I would go with probably a page or a paragraph at least. Mm-hmm. Just because, again, I know that there's obviously a certain amount of leeway within that, but yes, because I'm trained that the way that I've been trained, just because I'm a stage person, and even a film person, I've always been told that I come from the background of you want to hold what the writer says first.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I completely get that.
There's the writer first, and then there's the director, which is a little bit different than... Yes, LARP is a little bit different that way, but storytellers to me are almost the same way. Granted, they're not the exact same thing, but it's like that. So if I'm given a sentence, then at that point, I myself am a writer and a director, which is great, but then I don't want to be that person who is telling the director and the writer, well, screw you, I'm going to do what I want. So, you know what I mean? I try to be respectful of that. Mm-hmm. So to me, if I'm getting more of a background, then I'm being more respectful of what their vision is.
Interesting.
But then I've also been a director in scenes and so on and so forth. So I try to be more of... Yeah, I try to be more I try to be more respectful of that. So that's just me. I know others who would rather not have as much. But that's because I come from a theater background as opposed to film. And I know more film people tend to not put as much.
Right.
Yeah. But that's just me.
Yeah.
So.
Because I know that in other LARPs, such as Twin Mask and Dystopia Rising NorCal, a lot of what they tend to do is they will give you a character, but anything that is not already defined in the rules, you have free range to interpret that character as you want, because for some, they want their eventual goal to be that character is a living, breathing person. And if you give them too much construct, then it comes across like an NPC in a video game. But if you allow the NPC, whoever is inhabiting that role, to play that role the way they want, then not only is it enjoyable for the person playing that role, but it's also enjoyable for everyone else interacting with that NPC, because they will suddenly develop a relationship with that fully realized character. So that could also mean that when that character dies, like, they go into, as Kai would call it, a suffer puppet mode.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I feel that, and I think that's great when you're coming into a specific type of LARPs and so on and so forth, but I think that's, when you're thinking of NPCs, absolutely. I think it's actually pretty, that would be ideal. Excuse me. Yay! Hello!
Yay, mimosas!
Mimosas! And drink! However, yay live! I think that's understandable for an NPC. But I think with PCs it would make sense that you wouldn't have that much of a background for that reason, because you want them to have an interaction. I've never seen a PC, especially in LARPs, and I've done how many LARPs? I've never seen a PC that had more than a sentence. And I was like, yes, fantastic. Yay, I get to go play all day and I get to do whatever the hell I want to. Well, not, within constructs, but yeah. So I think it's great that way. And even NPCs, it's even less. And I'm like, okay, so give me my goal, give me my objectives. Tell me, the little bit of background that you need me to be aware of, and that's fine. But yeah, it also depends on what type of situations you're in and what type of games. And just like we've said, LARPs are much like, almost like tabletops and the type of games. It just depends on what type as well. When you're talking about very physical situations, you have to take that into account as well. So there's filmed and non-filmed. If you're talking about other type of LARPs, for example, like the vampire game, as we were mentioning earlier, there's just... And in which theater we were playing last night and today, we have almost no backgrounds at all. Like, it's up to the PC to make up their own background. And even NPCs don't get terribly much. So just, it depends.
When you improv a character, whether it's something that you created or something that is assigned to you, do you feel like when you don't have as much background, do you have characters you feel are more like you or more unlike you? Because you're coming from a theatrical background, and so there are certain maybe stock archetypes that you can draw from. Like, what do you tend to draw from more when you go into an improv for a character?
And there are definitely archetypes that I feel, I would say almost akin to, but as an actor, the first thing that we are taught, or most actors and so on and so forth, we're taught that we should do our best to not gravitate towards archetypes. But for me personally, I just find just to be blunt about it because people have seen it, I'm a BC person. So it's not like I'm going to be playing a Caucasian woman anytime soon. So there's a certain amount of rules that I know that I'm going to be, when it comes to, to face characters. And I'm aware of that, especially when people are going to see me. So there are archetypal roles that generally I try to, be inspired by and so on and so forth from when I'm given that. So, yeah. And also personality-wise, it's, again, when scripted, it's much easier for me to just almost divorce myself completely and play whatever I'm asked to do. But even so, there's... Yeah, I'll admit it. Half the time I'm usually asked to play roles or usually asked to do things that people have known me to do in the past, or at least around that. So, yeah. So
almost like people, if they ask you to play an NPC, play a character that they know is very similar to the characters you have played.
Around the same archetypal circles.
Oh, yeah.
As it were. Just specifically when it comes to LARPing, yes. Mm-hmm. Maybe not so much in other roles of performing that I've done. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so absolutely in games and so on and so forth, yes. Yeah.
I wanted to pick up on something that you happened to say, and that is, as someone who is POC, mm-hmm. you tend to gravitate towards certain roles because you don't look like a Caucasian female anytime soon. Mm-hmm. And I know that for me, when I tend to roleplay, I usually tend to roleplay guys with a tan for that same reason. And even though people have told me that I shouldn't feel pressured to do that, I think that sometimes playing someone who is brown, or I'm going to say golden brown, because that's my particular type of brown. What is it, morena? Like for Filipino? I usually just tend to draw from people who have that background. That includes playing characters like in Dying Kingdoms, I was a Polynesian type character, mm-hmm. and in Vampire, like the characters were either Filipino, or they were Middle Eastern, or they were Latinx. Mm-hmm. Or they were always some sort of brown. And even I do remember like someone saying, I might be repeating myself, like, I'm so sorry that you must feel that way. But over time I realized, no, that's a choice. That's an actual choice. I like my golden tan.
Yep.
And because like I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah. We can't divorce ourselves at the end of the day. We can't divorce ourselves from the concepts that people are generally going to see us in. That's just really what it comes down to. I mean, to an extent, that's just, there are certain ways that we can push limits, as far as media and everything else. But when you're talking about actual FaceTime and so on and so forth, you can, even as a performer, you can push yourselves, because I can talk like this all day and it's not a problem. However, when I'm on stage, whatever the case may be, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't.
I also wanted to, I guess, mention to the audience that because these are choices that both of us have made in terms of how we want to represent our characters, this is not a moratorium on how anyone else should play their characters. And when I say that, it's and I'm not speaking on behalf of my co-hosts Kai and Sin. They may have differing opinions on this, which I love them both very much. I wish you both were here at Kublacon. But
I do too.
But I would never ever tell someone that they cannot play a different culture, a different ethnicity, anything. Absolutely. As long as you put a fair amount of research into it. I want to give a shout out to Richard, who I met last night at the One World by Night vampire game, because he played the only other Kuei Jin in game, and he is by appearance, Caucasian male, and he studied Hawaiian Pidgin in order to play the role that he played, and his accent, his mannerisms were spot on and wonderful. And I even told him at the end of the night, you did an amazing job. And he told me the types of research that he did. He said, I listened to a podcast about the Hawaiian Pidgin accent, like very often. Like he studied. And me,
he looked wonderful, by the way.
Yeah.
I do want to say that. I did not actually get to play with him because playing the character that I was playing, actually using the same accent that I just used. I just wanted to say he looked fantastic as well.
Yeah.
So, it's... Yes, but these are choices that, that both of us have played. So they're choices, as we've said.
Yeah. And as, like on this podcast or whenever I promote the podcast, I usually don't talk about live action role play being, we are the most diverse, or we are people of color, or we're under, look, when I made a podcast, it's because Sin asked, and we made a podcast together, and because we wanted to talk about LARPs. We understand that our backgrounds are part of who we are, but that wasn't the main purpose of why we were ever wanting to talk about LARP. We just wanted to indulge in activity that we loved. We just happened to have those backgrounds. But at the same time, we are very proud to have those backgrounds. Like, you talk to Sin, and, she goes by Cynthia Marie, but she's very proud to be Boricua. She's very, very proud to be Puerto Rican. Yep. And, Kai, who is with us, like, he is on the spectrum himself. Like, he doesn't advertise it, but that's because that's his life. And those two are some of my best friends. And I didn't mean to make this about, like, what we were as a background, but it was one of the things that I just wanted to stress to people, that if you want to play, at least to me, if you want to play other characters from different backgrounds, and you try to give them a soul and a heart, it's very hard for me to be offended when you actually did the work. You were not just grabbing a few sentences and making a stereotype. It's like you wanted to make a fully realized person from a different culture. I personally appreciate that, because in my head, I understand that not everybody wants to be Elsa. Some people want to be Moana, and I am more than happy to make sure that happens.
Indeed. And I feel the exact same way. I'm terribly proud of of being a Filipino woman, even with the backgrounds that I have of having played other roles as well. But yeah, it's definitely a point of pride for me as well. So
yeah. And shout out to my my friends Satine Phoenix and Rudy Rudenberg for allowing me to play a Chultan character based off of a very, very Filipino archetype, like in D&D. Like, that's amazing. What would you say are good tips for improv for people who may not be comfortable doing improv when it comes to LARP? Or, like, what are some better advices of things that you would like to see at LARP when it comes to improv?
Well, I think if you're talking about convention specifically, if you're talking about performance and other things like that, I think there are certain things that should be somewhat planned. For example, performances itself. But when you're talking about scenes, which is just when you're just playing your character in that, I think it's, well, maybe this is more towards the advice thing, but I think if you have your set of goal achievement, I guess is the words I would use, and you already have your maybe not talking points, but what you want to get done. It's a little bit easier to know where you want to talk around it, I think is the verbiage I want to use. Because I've noticed if you're not specifically trained in that, if say for example, I'll just use Vampire LARP as an example.
Right.
It's just because that's what I'm going to be doing today. And I've seen other people. Say you want to go talk to a particular person in a clan that you don't really know, and you don't terribly feel comfortable talking to that, to that particular person. If you know what you want to achieve, say you want to just, I don't know, get something done with a particular character. I think if you know that you have that goal, then you know a little bit about the specifics of that clan, then it's just easier to do. And you can do that with maybe not so much D&D, but other mets. So I think a certain amount of prep or a certain amount of knowing what your end goals are, or at least either within the entire game or within that scene is good. That way you can play a little bit better. So I think for those who don't have a background in theater or in improv, I think it's just good to have a set amount of goals and then play within that. So I would like to see a little bit more of that, but I know it's a hard ask for some people.
I know for a convention type LARP, and I know that last podcast we had talked to people about LARPs at conventions and what makes them different from LARPs that we'll say like our buffer LARP that you do over an entire weekend, or a LARP that you do like right outside City Hall. You don't always have the luxury of having talking points. So what do you do in a case when there are no goals and you are like just trying to figure things out? Like, what would be some good advice? Oh, Tina, she just poured me a mimosa, which was literally a few drops because she just took a whole glass for herself.
Well, it's easier to talk when I have.
I know.
And you already had a glass and a half already.
I did have a glass and a half, but okay. Welcome to Sunday Mimosas. Tina is cheering with her arms up. Let me reiterate the question. So, what do you do when you are a character in a new setting and you don't have those goals?
I think as far as improv goes at that point, something as one of my teachers said way back when, which at that point it's like an open form improv. Just have fun. Just take the archetype that you already have from your background, which at that point it's much like, for lack of a better term, OG LARPing. Depending who you're talking to. But yes, old school LARPing, that type of thing. You're just taking what you know. It's just like, it's even almost like video gaming at that point, or just any type of gaming at that point. And it's the same thing as improv. You have your archetype, you have your concept of what a character is, and you have fun with it. And that's really what improv is all about, or even performance is all about. But you're interlocking what what you think your character wants and what they feel, and what you think that they would do in any situation. And you have fun with what you know, who you're interacting with. And just committing to it. That's really what it comes down to. It all comes down to commitment of what that character is to you, especially in any situation that you're in. And that's really what performance and improv, and that's where LARP comes down to. It's the same thing. And I feel the same way. That's why to me, like, it's not really gaming to me. It never has been to me. Like, even growing up, and again, we'll talk, going back to that point of like age, I never, yes, of course I've played video games and other type of games when I was growing up, but I was never really much of a gamer. I never really was. I mean, of course I've played arcade games and all that type of stuff, but yeah, I started LARP because of the fact that I was like, oh wait, I get to be an actor but play games too? Because I'm a geek and a nerd. Yes, I totally am. I will say that, but not in the same way that other gamers and nerds that I know are. But the performer in me loved the concept that I get to be in costume and I get to actually perform. And so that's where that started. And then that nerd and geek in me was like, oh, wait, I get to actually play a game in that as well? Kind of, sort of? Sure. Why wouldn't I? So that's the same thing. If you don't have any background in theater or in any performance at all, just be yourself and commit to your character and put that into it. That's it.
I would say that for me, if I were playing a new character in a new game, I fully comply with my ignorance, because I think it's more fun to play an ignorant character in a new world and just approach people like, I have no idea who you are. Who are you? And I don't have any idea what this is. Now, I realize that may not work for every setting, but coming in with the idea that you are new and needing to be introduced. If you're in a good LARP, people will make the point to realize this is an excellent opportunity for role play and introduce you to certain things. The other thing I've always said is, how can I help? And I say, how can I help? Because then if there is an existing plot or an existing quest, you can be included in that quest. Because anything that is not inclusion of a new player is gatekeeping.
Absolutely. And
in order to discourage gatekeeping, I always ask established players to go with the classic improv rules, yes and, or no but. We've said that many times on our podcast. Kai is a very big advocate of this, and so is Sin, and so am I. Yes and, no but for established players, but for even new players that are a con, yes and no but is also useful, but whenever in doubt and you're not sure where to go, always say yes, because it'll be more interesting to go into an adventure that you don't know anything about than it is to say no and not go on any adventures at all.
Absolutely. So, and that's the great thing. I think Yeah, yes, and I think, well, yeah, depending on what character you're playing, I think yes and is, well, yeah, yes and no, but is definitely a good place to go. But yeah, I think, yeah, and is always it's more fun in my opinion. But yes, well, there's both of those. Yeah, I think those are definitely good skill sets to just have in any LARP. Whatsoever. Especially when people are interacting with you both on screen and not. So, yeah, it's definitely a good thing.
All right. It is time to wrap things up. Before we go, I want to thank all of our listeners, especially our Patreon subscribers that enable us to continue making this content for you, especially Talon Bowler, the LARP Twin Mask, Treasurer Kalafa, Erin Ludlow, Vivid Vivka, and Sam Sanchez. Especially all of you, thank you so much for your support. Tina, where can they find you on the internets?
They can find me on Facebook and also on Twitter. You'll be able to find me at, I believe my Twitter name is at Tina_Braganza, and you can also find me on Facebook. Same thing, under Tina Braganza, and all the information is there, so you should be able to find me there, and find me there, and all the information's under that, so it's easy to find me.
Cool, and this is Ryan Omega. You could find me on Instagram and Facebook under Ryan Omega. You could find me on Twitter under Ryan OMGA. You could find me Tuesday evenings running Blank Slate, the LARP interactive show on twitch.tv/ScabbyRooster. And obviously this podcast with my friends Sin and Kai. And at least for a little while, I'm going to continue to circulate these podcasts that I do at Kublacon, but I assure you at some point Sin and Kai and I will get back together and record more things soon. All right, thank you for joining us for this episode of Live Action Roleplay Improv versus LARP, and until next time, bye!
Bye! Have a good morning!
Have a good morning!
And happy Memorial Weekend! Oh, good Lord.